our guests tonight are gonna introduce themselves because we kind of feel like it's more, it's kind of closer. So I will just proceed and give the word to Natascha. And yeah, happy that you're here, and maybe you can say a couple of words about yourself.
Well, hello everyone, and thank you very much for the invitation. My name is Natascha Flückiger, and I'm studying social anthropology and gender studies at the University of Bern. And I'm also part of the student body of the University of Bern. And as a board member, I am responsible for the Department of Equality.
Gaia, maybe you want to continue?
Yeah, hello everybody, I'm Gaia. My pronouns are she or her. I'm working for the Office for Gender Equality at the University of Bern for 2 years now. We are part of the university administration, and we are responsible for every university members, including students, researchers, professors, but also the administration staff. I work part-time there, and I also study political science and gender studies at the University of Bern, so I am also a student. And yes, I'm very looking forward to the discussion, and yeah, I'm interested in the exchange of our experiences.
So I want to give the word to our last and most international guest, Zana.
Hi. Hello, everyone. Nice to see you and meet you online. I hope you're feeling well and healthy. I am Zana Hoxha. I'm the founder and director of Artpolis. It's a feminist organization that advocates and uses arts as a tool for social change. And especially the past 6 years, we were one of the main drivers in Kosovo to push towards University of Pristina to have a policy, a mechanism that addresses sexual harassment. And I guess we will be talking about that further. Yeah, I mean, I'm looking forward to this discussion, and thank you for the opportunity.
So you're very welcome. So tonight, at first, we will kind of talk for about 40 minutes. So our guests, if you have any questions, maybe you can just jot them down, and then at the end, we'll have like about 20 minutes for questions. So while we talk, because it's just kind of 3 guests, I think we will just kind of try to talk freely. If you feel neglected or want to say something, maybe just raise your hand quickly. So I think that will be fine. So let's start with the first and open question. This kind of addresses all of you. What does sexualized violence at university or higher educational context mean? What does it include? Natascha, maybe you want to start?
Yes, I can start, and the others can add whatever they want to add. So, sexualized violence at the university is not really different than in other parts of our society. And what is important is that it is not about consensual sexuality. So we do not mean sexual activities or pleasure. We do talk about power and violence. I think that is very important. So if we talk about sexual violence at the university, we mean that sexuality is instrumentalized as a form of violence. And I think that the sexual level is used because it makes people are very, very vulnerable on this level. And that makes it also difficult for persons affected to speak up and to talk about their experiences. And what is important, or what we also see, is that sexualized violence can take on very different forms. So it includes, for example, verbal forms, but also gestures or deeds. And yes, I think that's important. And one last thing I would like to say is that or to bring in this concept of the defining power. That is to say that every individual defines his or her own boundaries, and it's up to the individual to say whether boundaries are crossed, and for them to define what sexualized violence means to them.
Zana, would you agree with these definitions? Is it also like the kind of terms you work with?
Definitely. I mean, there are, in the context of sexual violence in the university, I think it's also, it's very closely linked with sexism in the society and the mentality of sexist mentality of degrading, having this power to degrade the other individual just because it's a woman, or just because it's a student, or because of the position of power. So definitely I agree with Natascha. I mean, we live in a society that where it was very common to be sexually harassed in every step of the street, in whether you were a child or a young woman or an older woman, you were constantly a target. And then it was kind of a normative for students to feel intimidated, at least by their professors or fellow students. And I remember back when I was a student, there was this, in general, there was this normative of how you would get dressed, how you'd act in front of the teacher, in front of the professor, and how it was as if anything you, the way you were dressing, the way you were behaving, it would have something to do with professors or your fellow colleagues' behavior. And still, I think that because of that mentality, very often sexist behavior, and very often women students especially, are easily targeted by the professors and by other students just because of a certain way they dress, certain way they talk, or because they they are maybe a bit different than the norms of what is accepted or not. We, as an organization, we have noticed that there is a huge shift, there is a change of behavior, there is a change of how this phenomena is perceived. And this has to do not only with this change of mentality, but also with creating a safe space for students to learn, to walk, and to study. And this is maybe a longer conversation that if there are questions, I would be happy to show you some examples. But definitely, I agree with Natascha, but I think it's also part of this wider perspective on how women are perceived, and due to the phenomena of people having a certain power that they want to use.
Thank you, Gaia. You work in this field. I mean, you work in the gender equality office, the university. I mean, a lot has been said about what sexual violence is. What would you say? Why is it especially important to target it in this university context?
Yeah, I think the other two just say it's because of these hierarchies. There are different target groups. There are a lot of students, but also assistants, professors, and this leads to these different hierarchies. And I think it's important to talk about this these power structures and dominance. Yeah, it's a very dominant field, the institution of a university.
So would you say the power structures are even more hierarchical than in the society per se?
I think the important thing is this dependency. When we are looking on students and professors, but also on doctoral students and professors, they're very dependent on the professor. And I think it's, maybe it's more, I don't know how to say it, more ausgeweitet in this field, I don't know.
More influential, I don't know.
Yeah.
So Natascha and Zana, you've both been nodding a lot. Do you want to add anything about this aspect of hierarchy and dependency? Just feel free to talk.
Yes, well, I can add. I mean, just recently there was a change in the criminal code of Kosovo, and it was amended in 2019. And for the first time, it foresees a specific definition of sexual harassment. Because in Kosovo, I mean, sexual violence, just to make it clear, sexual violence is often perceived as violence that occurred during the war in Kosovo, where around 20,000 women were raped or sexually violated from the Serbian army, paramilitary groups, and other formal and non-formal military groups. So just to make it clear that there is this notion that we use more when we address sexual violence in university is sexual harassment. So in 2019, with the amendment of the Criminal Code of Kosovo, it was also for the first time that it was a definition of sexual harassment that was put there in line with the requirements of the Istanbul Convention and criminalization of such acts, where sexual harassment is defined as any form of unwanted verbal, non-verbal, or physical conduct of a sexual nature which aims at or effectively constitutes a violation of the dignity of a person, which creates an intimidating, hostile, degrading, or offensive environment. And the sanction foreseen for sexual harassment cases, which is also, so it was a novelty because this was never done before. There were no sections before on sexual harassment cases. So the sanction foreseen is the fine, monetary fine, or imprisonment up to 3 years. And aggravated circumstance is foreseen for teachers, healthcare professionals, a person entrusted with the upbringing or care of a person, or a person in position of authority over the person, as well as religious leaders. In such cases, the minimum requirement of imprisonment is from 6 months up to 3 years. Further, the Criminal Code of Kosovo also foresees and defines cases of harassment for people who engage in patterns of repeated and unwanted attention or communication with the intent to harass or put another person under surveillance, and can be fined or imprisoned up to 3 years. Communication or attention put on another person may include the following acts, such as repeatedly appearing at the home, school, work, making repeated phone calls, sending or leaving messages, sending text messages, mail or emails, or leaving or sending unwanted gifts or other items. And also the Kosovo law on gender equality and law on protection from discrimination also defines sexual harassment even though sanctions under these two specific laws are poorly drafted and the sanctions are not in proportion to the acts that are suffered. But I think it's very important that sexual harassment acts are in accordance to the definition of the Istanbul Convention. And even though the convention does not define, sexism per se, it does define sexual harassment and stalking and other forms of harassment, which was a big problem because until 2019, and very often even now, unfortunately for those judges and prosecutors who haven't read the law very well or who are not fully implementing the new code, sexual harassment is still not harshly fined, and we were not able to trace any case where the accusation for sexual harassment or sexual violence in public university has occurred, and that case was taken in front of the court. So, yeah.
Thank you, Zana. I just want to kind of like swap in. Zana explained all of these examples of, guidelines to deal with these cases and whatever can happen as a prosecution. What does your work include? What happens if at the University of Bern cases of sexual violence, sexual harassment, or sexualized violence happen? How do you deal with it? What does it include?
I'm really not an expert in the whole civil law, but we have legal baselines which defines sexual harassment and sexism. So that's not, we don't accept sexual harassment at the University of Bern. And we have like procedures inside our university that if a person was sexually harassed, they can contact 3 different internal contact points. And one contact point is our Office for Gender Equality. There are other 2 points, and there's also an external contact point. They can go there, and we have the duty to do something, but just what the person who comes to us wants to do. I hope it's clear.
Natalia. Sorry. Yeah, I just realized. Thank you. Before I proceed with you, Natascha, just quickly maybe for our listeners, we had like a meeting before this one, and we were talking about terms we use in this context. And of course, for the 3 of us, we're all German speaking. Zana is also not primarily English speaking, so it's kind of unclear how to address these terms. And in German, we say sexualisierte Gewalt and not sexuelle Gewalt sometimes, because we kind of try to imply that it's nothing to do with sexuality, but with violence and with, power. So also here, if you might hear different terms from the people talking. I think it's just, different approaches to the same problem. But when we say sexualized violence, which does not seem to be so common in English, it's probably because it's what we learned in German. So it's just a quick disclaimer. Natascha, what does your work entail in this field? What are you doing to prevent or to, prevent sexualized violence or to help people who encountered it at university level?
So we at the student body of the University of Bern, we do not have any consulting expertise, but we do work as a so-called, or we do have a so-called triage function. So we try, if students come to us and report any cases, or if they feel uncomfortable, we try to listen to them in the first place, and then we try to show them what kind of opportunities they have. So as Gaia already mentioned, there are different points where people can go to and report their cases. And we try to show the students, okay, what kind of opportunities do they have? And we try to support them if they need to be supported, or if they want to be supported. And furthermore, I would say that we do some awareness raising, or we try to talk about this issue publicly, and we do campaigns, or we are part of campaigns, for example, such as 16 Days. But also we do organize events, for example, workshops for students where they learn about the issue. And for example, once we did an awareness workshop where students could learn how to name and address, but also prevent cases of sexualized violence. Or just last week, we did a workshop where students learned also to name and address when boundaries are crossed. So we try to give or to teach students that they can be affected by sexualized violence, but also that they can, witness situations of sexual violence, but also they can be the perpetrators. And I think it is important to show students that they can take different parts or different roles, and it is important to raise awareness.
Did any of these approaches you mentioned, Natascha, prove more, more effective than others? Like, I mean, you've been doing this for a while. Did you figure out which approaches worked best and which are probably not widely accepted or not very effective?
Well, I think that's difficult to say. I mean, raising awareness is we try to do our best. But for example, what we realize is that oftentimes it is hard for us to reach out and mobilize students. And for example, when we do these workshops, we've made the experience that oftentimes participants are women or people we read as women. And we've seen that male students are oftentimes absent from these workshops. And we've discussed this as well. And we think probably it has to do with the fact that male students do not feel affected that much, or oftentimes they are the privileged ones and they probably do not see why they have to attend these kind of workshops. And yeah, I think that's one thing where it is hard for us sometimes to reach out, but we try our best, and we go on doing this. Yes.
Thank you. Zana, which are some of the obstacles you encounter in your work?
Well, back when we started addressing sexual harassment in general Kosovo society in 2015, as I said before, it was a normative, it was widely accepted that you are a woman and you have to accept that you will be sexually harassed. So this was a very difficult time because I think that this is also, due to a very patriarchal mindset, as well as how women were foreseen, how they were envisioned in our society, that they have to shut up, they have to accept what is served to them. And this widely spread misogynistic behavior. So when we started addressing sexual harassment in the street and in general in public space, we found out, unfortunately, that the biggest and the most widespread form of sexual harassment is in public University of Pristina. So we started with protests. We did a couple of street actions performances, street performances, where we address sexual harassment. We made it to, we made a picture of one of our street performances, made it to The Guardian or Independent, Telegraph, and it became a huge topic even here, like who are they, what do they want, why are they putting Kosovo on the map like this, you know, like, is this really a problem? So this initiated a lot of discussion also in media, in creating a huge public discussion, a huge public awareness. But we also found out back at that time, Facebook was not what it is today. So Facebook as a way of, you know, like it was becoming a mainstream social media. So it was functioning for us to do a number of hashtags, like we take back the night. We did a big campaign for a couple of weeks where only women were invited. And then men got curious to know what's this? So why is this happening? Why are they putting these hashtags, you know? Very simple, like my body, my right, you know, I want to take back the night. I want to walk in the street alone. I don't want to be afraid. We need more public lighting because there are many streets where there wasn't public lights. And so we started this discussion in the university, first in the halls with the students before entering the lectures. Then we did workshops. And I remember this 6 years ago that when one of my colleagues went to ask for a permission from the dean of University of Philosophical Studies, and she told him, like, we are from this organization, we want to do an event. Before actually telling him what was the event about, he sexually harassed her and invited her on a date. And the way she responded to this invitation was by saying, well, actually, my answer is linked with what we want to do here. We want to address sexual harassment and increase awareness amongst not only students, but also professors and administration and deans about the impact of sexual harassment and how this is a violation of human rights. And after that, we did several protests. And I'm very proud to say that after 52 years of the establishment of the University of Pristina, we finally have an adopted policy. So there is an established policy that addresses sexual harassment since May 2021. And this has been achieved due to a lot of advocacy, lobbying, working with the University of Pristina, not closely, but being their watchdog, you know, like kind of being there to criticize them and also to guide them. And finally, this policy is adopted, but there are no cases reported. So we had a meeting with the rectorate, with the leadership of University of Pristina 2 weeks ago. And we agreed that we need to make an action plan. We need to make an urgent action plan on how we are going to implement this policy, what we need to set up for the mechanism. So I look forward to staying in contact with Gaia and Natascha and anyone who would be interested to share how the University of Bern or other universities are addressing this and how we can, what are maybe some of the best examples, which not necessarily can be implemented here, but at least they can be maybe a start to start implementing this policy. So on the 10th of December, we will have a joint conference with the management of the university and the Ministry of Education, where we will propose several steps for the university to start the implementation. And one of those steps is also to set up an office, have a person who is going to address the claims, but also set up a chain of response and how these actions are going to be, these actions are going to be condemned, you know, because in the policy, there are some very good ways of how this is going to be addressed, but there are still some loops. So we want to make sure that after all the work that has been done, we had around 50 workshops not only in Pristina, because the University of Pristina has branches in 5 regions of Kosovo, and they are all public university branches. So we've been working also in these other branches, and we want to make sure that such acts are condemned, and the people who are doing that behavior do not go unpunished. And especially women students who are mostly the target of such acts do not stop their studies, because one of the effects that sexual harassment has in students is that the students do not feel comfortable going back to and continue their studies anymore, and very often they stop and they quit their studies because of such acts. So we want to stop that, and we want to call for action to stop that.
Thank you, Zana. I saw we have 2 questions in the chat function, which I did not know existed, but apparently it does. Our discussion here will last for maybe around 10 to 15 more minutes, and then we will come back to those questions. I hope it's okay for Claudia and Jessie who asked. I saw them, and we will post those questions later on. So as for now, Gaia, so I mean, what kind of needs to change on whatever level you choose in order to prevent or to end sexualized violence at universities?
I think that we need to realize that prevention of sexual harassment is a leadership task. So, for example, you are an assistant and then you get the professorship, and your main focus is your research. But at the same time, you have doctoral students, you have to teach, and you have this leadership task. And I think one way to do that would be mandatory workshops or mandatory education on this prevention of sexual harassment.
So who would you target? I mean, like students or professors, people working at the university, or kind of everyone?
No, it's the leadership task would target the professors.
Yeah.
And I think that's one important thing at the university.
But I mean, Zana mentioned before that, I mean, obviously not only students are affected from sexual harassment or violence, but also people, I mean, a professor, female professor, or any kind of professor actually can be affected as well. I mean, do these people also come to the equality office, or is it specially targeted at students?
Maybe Natascha can say more about it, because we have no figures at the University of Bern. We have no figures in Switzerland. We have just the cases, or our reported cases. So just the people who came to us and report sexual harassment or sexism. So I think that's a big problem, that we have no figures. But maybe Natascha, you want to say something about your Umfragen surveys?
It was pass the word, Natascha, then.
Yes, thank you very much. So first of all, I would like to say that I definitely agree with what Gaia said. I think it is very important to see that prevention is a leadership task, but I think it is also kind of a combination is needed between this bottom-up approach and this top-down, because we've also seen in Switzerland, for example, with the national feminist strike in 2019, that such protests and bottom-up mobilization is very important to raise awareness and to bring this into discussion publicly. So I would agree with Gaia and also at this bottom-up approach. And to the numbers, I can also say a few words. So last year in the autumn semester, we did a university-wide survey for the second time, and we asked students questions around the issue of discrimination in general, but also around the issue of sexualized violence in particular. And what we found out was that 8% of students have already survived sexual harassment at the University of Bern. And on the first sight, this number doesn't seem really high, but we do expect that there is a high number of unreported cases at the University of Bern, because the survey has also shown that only 2% of students who have survived sexual harassment have reported their cases. So we think that there are much more cases than have been reported. And also we have found out that in the university context, sexualized violence is oftentimes perpetrated from fellow students. So in 70% of the cases, we have fellow students that are the perpetrators. And I think this is also a very interesting fact. So I think there are dependencies and power structures do play an important role, but not only. I mean, I think that's something that is very interesting, and so that is why we realized that we really have to raise awareness around students as well, and that it's not only this dependency or this power relation that is a cause of sexualized violence. Yes.
Thank you. Zana, you were nodding. Do you want to add something to this?
Well, I agree with Natascha, but this is very important. I mean, they're very interesting for me to learn, because it's a different situation. It's a slightly different situation here. Mostly the harassment comes from power structures, and it comes as a conditioning for students for the grade or to pass the exam from their professors mainly. And I don't think that, and I think that this is, maybe that's how the sexual harassment is kind of, it's understood, you know, that it's closely linked with power structures. But now hearing Natascha, I mean, I'm just like thinking whether we have tackled enough, or whether we have had a perspective. Do we have still a clear perspective on harassment coming from fellow students, you know, because also as a matter of this sexist approach that I was telling before, on how women are seen in our society. So I think that this is something I will think about, and also maybe have a focus on our future research and how we address this. Nevertheless, I think that I think that sexual harassment and sexual violence in university has still not yet been acknowledged as such. You know, we are not in the same situation that we are, where different forms of violence are acknowledged and reported. I think that in our society, we need to work more towards raising awareness, trying to change the mentality, doing more research, and having more data on whether this is a big phenomenon or not, and where is it coming from, and how are we going to move forward towards addressing and fighting this phenomenon. But it is a slightly different situation here, where, as I said before, sexual harassment and violence is used, and it's mainly coming from professors towards students, as a way of, because English, it's blackmail, as a way of blackmail for the grades or for passing the exam or not. So yeah.
Thank you, Zana.
Maybe I can add something, just because we are talking about these power structures. When we look at the professorship, we see that just 25% at the University of Bern, it's 25% female professors. And I think we need that the students continue to study, and then they have to decide then that they want to do a doctorate. I hope it's the right word. And then they can get this leadership position. And I think because of that, it's important to know that it's mostly at the University of Bern between students, but that we are aware that they continue to study and that they decide for a scientific career, so that we can change these hierarchies and these power structures inside the university.
And maybe I can also add, so I really stressed that sexual harassment is in most cases, that is to say 70%, coming from fellow students. But our numbers also show that around a quarter of the students of the University of Bern have reported to be, or that they were sexually harassed by a teacher. So I think that is also a big part, and we shouldn't miss that fact.
Thank you. Well, our discussion time is kind of slowly coming to an end, and I feel like there might be some more questions than we previously acknowledged. So I will kind of just maybe as a kind of closing question for all of you. We mentioned a lot of things, but maybe just to wrap it up, what needs to change in order to not even prevent sexualized violence or harassment, but to kind of, to make it inexistent, to make the organizations you all work for unnecessary because it's not a problem anymore. So maybe Zana, you want to start? What needs to change?
Well, I think that change, I mean, although gender-based violence, as we know, it's a widespread phenomenon, it's a global problem, and sexual harassment and violence is part of that problem. I think that it varies, the circumstances vary in different countries. Kosovo is a very fragile state, it's a very young state, and we need to reinforce more the mechanisms that punish such crimes. We need to make a couple of examples of people who do such crimes, and when reported, such crimes are punished according to the law, which I mentioned before. And I think that by having such examples, the society in general is going to feel safer, and also we need to create safe spaces for students to learn, to study, and to feel safe to socialize. I want to mention a case. The public university in Pristina has a very big campus in the city center, where when the dark starts, or when the evening starts in the winter time, which is around 4:35, the main lights of that street where most of the students were passing were not working. So it was completely dark for them to move from one side of the campus to the other. or to go to the main street. And after lobbying and doing a lot of work with Pristina municipality, with university management, with the public services directorate and Ministry of Education, we accomplished to have public lights work in the campus. And this might sound like a very silly thing for a country like Switzerland or for other EU countries, but this is very important. So that's why understanding the cultural and local context is very important. And I don't think that there are solutions that fit all. So parallelly, we are working towards changing the mentality of what is sexual harassment and what is sexual violence, both for women and men to understand before committing such acts or when committing such acts. And also we are working towards punishing such acts and having in mind that such acts are done mainly by power structures. We are also working with them in a way that they understand and in a way of exposing them more towards the impact that their actions might have in other people. And also we are working with local and national institutions and media as well towards raising public awareness and having a better and a clearer understanding of the impact of sexual harassment and sexual violence, and that such acts are condemned by law, but also by the society. And the society does not promote them and does not encourage such acts in general.
Thank you, Zana. So Gaia, I want to pass you the word for your final wrap-up speech on what needs to change.
Yeah, I think a lot of things have to change. Maybe one point at our university is that we need to talk more about sexual harassment and sexism, that we have accessible contact points, that the students who get sexually harassed sich trauen, or I don't know, that they come to us and that they know what will happen if they come to us. So I think it's a big problem that they are, yeah, sie trauen sich nicht. I don't know the word, but they don't know what happened when they come and reported a case. So I think this openness and that we speak about it, it's a really important thing.
Thank you, Gaia. So Natascha, your final thoughts?
Well, I definitely agree with what has been said already, and also with Gaia concerning the context here in Bern. So we do need, how do you say that, niederschwellig? I don't know that word in English.
Accessible.
Accessible, yes.
I thought accessible, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, we do need accessible counseling and reporting offices. I think that's very important. And I think that what needs to change, I think there are two things or two bigger issues. I think on the one hand, we have to recognize that sexualized violence is not an individual problem, but that it is structural. So we do have to change the university structures, and that means that we need this mix of bottom-up but also top-down approaches to really change these structures. And on the other hand, I think that we need these cultural changes. So we need to understand, well, if it's not an individual problem, it is a collective problem of our society, and we have to change our culture and our behavior at the university and in the academic context. And Well, I think that takes a long time because university structures and the university culture is changing only very slowly. So yeah, we have to do what we can and go on.
Thank you very much. Well, thanks to all of you. Now we're gonna get over to the discussion part. I see that we have a ton of questions in the chat. Well, I will kind of just read them, I guess, and then if anyone has more questions, I mean, just feel free to, you know, either activate your camera or just your unmute, and then you can speak up freely.